The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's revelation.
13, Sergeant 1 Essential. Number 30 Broad Street, 1022.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is Monday, and instead of doing the review of the mainstream media from Sunday, although there was plenty to report, we got to talk about this fucking assassination. So that's what we're gonna do, and there's plenty to talk about. There's also other news. Obviously, over the weekend, we know that, well, it was even before the weekend started, Israel attacked Iran, so that's a whole other can of worms. But over the weekend, we had No King's Day that was preempted by an assassination by a supposed Trump supporter. Doesn't add up. We're going to get into that more coming up right now. So we'll start with the obvious reason for the assassinations, which is No King's Day. So AP reports anti-Trump demonstrators crowd streets, parks, and plazas across the U.S. Organizers say millions came. Now, why would the mainstream media be quoting organizers who say millions came when originally the reporting was thousands turn out? Now, there were large crowds in the largest cities. So LA, New York had thousands. But for the thousands of protests scheduled, most of them saw a smattering of people. Like in the locales near me, there were a dozen, maybe 24 people, mostly old women and other disillusioned, fat young people. But here's the issue, and we're going to get into the issue. But first, let's get into what the mainstream media has to say. AP said masses of demonstrators packed into streets, parks, and plazas across the United States on Saturday to protest Donald Trump, marching through downtown and small towns, blaring anti-authoritarian chants mixed with support for protecting democracy and immigrant rights. Organizers, and there they have to quote this, organizers of No King demonstration said millions had marched in hundreds of events, and it was thousands of events, but many had to be canceled because nobody showed. So it was hundreds of events, but millions showed up to hundreds of events. The math doesn't even add up. The original reports from news media was thousands. Story goes on to say governors across the U.S. had urged calm and vowed no tolerance for violence, while some mobilized the National Guard ahead of marchers gathering. Now, here's the point. So even before No Kings, we saw what was happening with the violent anti-ICE raids, and the Democrats who are already in trouble, and the liberal establishment who is already in trouble, so we're setting the stage here, that they completely lost the violence narrative. And what do I mean by that? We saw the news media showed time and time again demonstrators shooting fireworks at police, confronting police, throwing rocks at police, and getting in fights and stuff, whatever. But we knew on No King's Day that there was going to be some violence. The organizers said no violence, and it's everyone's right to, and freedom of speech to protest. And most of the protests went off fine, and we're going to get into that in just a second, but there was violence. So, like January 6th, before the event even takes place, there needs to be a catalyst to cement the narrative. So on January 6th, you had the pipe bombs. The comical props that were pipe bombs, they were inert devices that the last time those pipe bombs were ever seen with egg timers that hadn't been produced in decades, obviously training devices from the FBI. Those pipe bombs had to be planted before January 6th and were reported to the media before January 6th protests even began to cement the narrative. There were other reasons for doing so, and you're going to see it here as well. And those reasons on January 6th were to release certain elements of the military and law enforcement that couldn't have been released unless terrorism was a possibility. And obviously they discover pipe bombs, even though by the CCTV, the surveillance footage, you could see that law enforcement wasn't concerned about these so-called pipe bombs and let school children cross the street within 50 feet of the supposed pipe bomb. All right. Let's go to PJ Media. They had the headline, Democrats have no business lecturing us about violent rhetoric. Now, look at the headline. This is from June 15th, but the story had been up, and they don't have the right to lecture us about violent rhetoric, but they're getting to do so, particularly Ron Wyden, the senator from Oregon. Now, this is what we have to show here, is that the narrative for violence was going against the Democrats, which were already having a messaging problem. So what did they try to do? In the wake of the ICE protests, they needed a catalyst. So they tried to get Senator Padilla, who is a Hispanic senator from California, to bum rush Kristi Noem at a closed news conference, which it wasn't open to the public. It was a closed news conference, and Senator Padilla went there, and we're going to get into that in a bit too. He tried to rush the stage, and then he resisted as Secret Service and police tried to push him back and then restrain him. So he continued to try to rush the stage. And if you look at Senator Padilla, he's not a small guy, but this was staged. Let's get to the reality of the matter, and that's No King's Day. Just the News is reporting one person killed in shooting at No King's protest in Salt Lake City. Post Millennial, Salt Lake City, No King's protest, murder suspect pushed Antifa views. Now, before I just want to get into the subhead, I just want to say that Antifa has been a thorn in the side of progressive politics for some time. The reason being is Antifa is just, they're communist because if you're anti-fascist, that makes you a communist. But they're really rebranded anarchists. So Antifa is really an anarchist thing, but they're railing against fascism and whatever. They don't even understand politics, but anybody who's got money is part of the fascist system. And I won't argue fascism, but it's corporate fascism. And then actually the liberal establishment, which Antifa is working for, is actually pushed by the corporate elite. So corporate fascism is actually who they're doing the bidding for. But I'm not going to get into the whole brown shirt talking points, the modern brown shirts. In any case, Arturo Gamboa, the man charged with murder after a deadly shooting at Salt Lake City's No Kings protest, appears to be a self-described anti-government radical who publicly supported Antifa. Now, the Democrats knew this was going to happen. Progressives knew this was going to happen. The problem is the No Kings event was planned some time ago. And on the heels of the anti-ICE protests, it was going to get ugly. There was going to be some violence, and people are already stirred up by what was happening with the anti-ICE thing. And plus, that's on top of the anti-Israel, the Palestinian thing. And so the activist movement, the OFA movement, has nurtured these activists, professional protesters, Molotov cocktail throwers, and they're pretty much out of control. So they're hoping that the paid protesters will keep the crazy loonies that have went along with this narrative from committing violence. Just the News reported on the 15th, protests grow violent late Saturday on the West Coast. So, yeah. Now I don't know what happened. I had a post-millennial article that, of course, these articles disappear on me occasionally, so I don't know exactly what happened. But the post-millennial was reporting that in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington, I think particularly Washington and Seattle. Now, I don't have the text here, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. But in the Pacific Northwest, the hotbed for progressivism, there was also violence against police. And so how that disappeared out of my stack, it's very important. But usually when I'm putting the podcast together in the morning, I'm not a morning guy. And so, I start work before my coffee and I can't necessarily remember everything that I need to put in. But now once I start going, I remember, and you can look it up yourself, that government buildings were attacked in the Pacific Northwest as well as police. And again, they had to call for curfews and all this other stuff. So that happened also on Saturday. What I was talking about before that I want to get into now is that Senator Padilla denies staging outbursts, and the author of this, Matt Morgales, says he can't stop laughing. Neither can I. I was going to feature the segment from Face the Nation yesterday of Padilla speaking to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation. I didn't want to get into because it was all full of denials and Margaret Brennan and Democrats, they feed off each other, and it's such a weaving of propaganda. She asked leading questions and he's got the answers and it's all wrapped up in a nice bow. You weren't bum rushing the podium, were you? No, I wasn't. It wasn't staged, was it? No, certainly not. It was a staged event. There were no other politicians there, local or otherwise. He was the only one there. I don't know how he got into the building. He never identified himself as a senator until they started securing him. And the point is, when he went to rush the podium, if you look at the video footage, at first they stop him, but then he kept pushing against them and yelling and disrupting a closed press conference. This wasn't on a public sidewalk or anything like that. This was in a building where the public wasn't allowed. So although you're a senator, you're still part of the public. This is a press conference, which means people conducting a press conference and then the press. I've been at hundreds of thousands of press conferences in my career, right? I know what a closed press conference is. It's the press and the people giving the press conference. That's it, right? There's not any, sometimes people will get in and shout questions. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But I, in my whole career, 30 years, have never saw someone get into a press conference and then rush the podium. Because, especially with an important official, because you're going to get taken down. And so that's exactly what Senator Padilla was trying to elicit, was a takedown on TV. And his aides were there filming the whole thing. Although I think it was Fox News that actually got the best cell phone footage of the takedown. All right, and there's more from Saturday. Just the News, Trump beheading post by North Carolina lawmaker prompts calls for her resignation. North Carolina lawmaker, Democratic Representative Julie Van Hafen of Wake County advocated the decapitation of President Donald Trump, escalated Saturday and into Sunday on social media. Van Hafen is accused of posting an image of a woman holding signage with the image of a bloody used guillotine and the words, "In these difficult times, some cuts must be maybe necessary," and a prop on one end of the handle represented a beheaded Donald Trump. Now, we saw this in Trump's first campaign with Kathy Griffin, a self-described D-list actress and comedian who made a famous video of her slowly raising up the fake decapitated head of Donald Trump. And many people called that was incitement of violence, which certainly it was, and that she should have been arrested or at least censured in some way or form. Trump learned a lot since his first term, so hopefully these people will be taken out. And then particularly after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, which I blame squarely on Joy Reid and others that listen to her, because this is what happens. And so what are we going to see from this assassination attempt that we haven't even gotten into yet is probably more assassination attempts from the liberals, because this is contrived. I'm not saying the people weren't killed, but what I'm telling you is it's a hard nut to kill somebody, especially if you're a civilian, have never served in the military. What background this guy has, Bolter, but we're going to get into it. All right. Post-millennial, breaking news, suspected Minnesota assassin Vance Bolter arrested near his home. A face of evil after relentless and determined police work, the killer is now in custody. Now I have to interject once again. Arrested near his home, and I'm going to show a map in just a second. So this guy who had planned these assassinations, instead of fleeing, first, I don't want to tell people what to do, but if you commit a crime, the first thing you have to do is get out of the state. Because the state with which you committed the crime is going to have, as they did in Minnesota, a manhunt with all the SWAT teams mobilized and everybody and drones and helicopters, and it's job number one for the entire state law enforcement. That means every municipal police department, the state police, the investigative bodies of the state, and the FBI, et cetera, are all working on catching one guy. What does he do? He doesn't flee the state. He goes towards his home. And we're going to get into more on this fact in just a second. So, of course, that's where they're going to concentrate the search. If you want to go away from where they think you're going to go, you don't go towards your home. You don't go visit your sister or whatever. All those places are going to be under surveillance. But let's get into the story. More. The AP, the man is suspected, at least the AP is reporting. The man suspected of shooting two Minnesota lawmakers is in custody after surrendering to police. So we're going to get into the whole story in just a minute, but a guy that wore a rubber mask, so we don't know how they decided that this was the guy who did it so quickly. A guy in a rubber mask assassinates a couple people, and during the assassination, cops just happen to roll up to the house. How they knew that there was trouble brewing here, who knows? So the story gets more and more bizarre. But the guy is a shootout with police, right? Runs into the house, presumably then he killed after shooting the husband through an open door, then goes into the house and shoots the lawmaker, and then evades police. Amazing. So evades police, but then when he's surrounded by police later near his home, then he surrenders. And he had a gun. Is it the same gun used in the murders? If you just murdered people, you would run away and then keep the gun you murdered. I mean, it's starting to get ridiculous. And if you're not going to have a shootout with the police, why carry the gun? Even if you know police are closing in on you, you could bury it, you could throw it in a lake, you could, you know. And the thing is, everybody was speculating that this guy was going to shoot himself. He had murdered 2 people, and you know the way the narrative goes. And then dead men's tell no tales, so we don't know if he shot himself, was shot. But case closed, right? When I got the murderer, he's dead. Can't defend himself. Excuse me. All right, let's get to the story. The man suspected of killing the man suspected of killing Minnesota lawmaker and wounding another crawled to officers in surrender Sunday after they located him in the woods near his home, bringing an end to the massive nearly 2-day search that put the entire state on edge. Crawled. Now, this is important maybe to people that aren't wordsmiths, but this is wordplay. He crawled on his belly. So this is a way to depict humiliation. And this is the way, you know, they're going to depict him as a coward and he's a Trump supporter. And I mean, this is the narrative they're trying to win back. And the narrative is on violence because the left has a long history of violence. So it's not something they can easily escape by No King's event that only had 1 murder, you know. So Vance Bolter, and then he ran from police, and his last name is Bolter, you know. So, in any case, and he said he worked in food service, and there's actually a food equipment company, a very well-known one named Bolter. We don't know if any of this guy's history is authentic. So, which makes him even more of a suspect of intelligence. Just like Paddock in the Las Vegas shootings, he was involved. He was an intelligence gun runner that was set up as a patsy. And I'm not going to digress into that, but this has all the earmarks of being an intelligence black op. So they needed this to occur. How steeped in intelligence this guy was. Is he a patsy? Is he a witting patsy? An unwitting patsy? It's hard to figure out. But in any case, Vance Bolter was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. He is accused of posing as a police officer and fatally shooting Democratic House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark in their home early Saturday in the northern Minneapolis suburbs. So, let's just get to the crux of the matter before I get to this New York Times article. All right, so early Saturday morning. So it's before the No Kings event even happened. And this is what I'm talking about. The January 6th thing, before January 6th even gets going, they find pipe bombs. So before No Kings, this guy is setting the tone. Now, at first, people are like, oh, he's a Democrat. And so the only source we have is attributing him as a Republican is his supposed roommate. Right? So there's this fat guy who looks like he's a dropout from drama school, and he gives a teary confession of sorts and reads texts, supposedly, really not, they're intelligence texts, basically admitting the crime. He reads these texts that were supposedly from the shooter. I'm a bad guy, did a bad thing, you won't see me for a while, or I'll be dead soon, or whatever. But the only reason he didn't end up dead is because everybody said he was going to end up dead. And then so they got to change the narrative, and that's been done several times. But the thing here we have to concentrate on is that in the early morning hours of Saturday, before the No Kings event, that this guy goes on a violent assassination spree, purportedly killed 2 people, and then he shot 2 other people who have very similar names. You know, we don't know what the hell happened. But one of the interesting caveats is this Speaker of the House recently, purportedly, was the swing vote in not allowing state funds, social services, to go to illegal immigrants. And in Minnesota, they thought it was a sure thing for Democrats to vote on this legislation to allow illegal immigrants as a sanctuary to receive social services benefits. But a Democrat, not only that, the lead Democrat was a swing vote, because everybody thought that she was going to vote for the bill, against the bill, and she voted for the bill in a surprise. So she's taken out anyway by the Democratic machine, but we have to weave the narrative in such a way that we're going to pin it on Republicans because we're losing the violence narrative. All right, let's get to some reporting here. Suspect in Minnesota attacks is arrested, ending manhunt. The search for Vance Bolter put the state on edge. Everybody's reporting that the state was on edge. He has been charged with second-degree murder in the attacks which killed state lawmaker and wounded another. The complaint against Bolter describes police officers arriving to the home of the state representative Melissa Hortman and seeing Bolter shoot her husband, Mark, through an open door. The police then exchanged gunfire with him and he ran into the home before escaping. At some point, he also fatally shot Representative Hortman. So, the shooter, and we don't know if it was Bolter, right? Because he was wearing a rubber mask. And if you look at how he's apprehended, we're not sure if he's wearing the same clothes, but we'll get into it. And I'm not saying he's not the shooter. I'm saying there's a discrepancy. He was wearing a mask. We don't know if he's necessarily the shooter. But miraculously, as he's committing, and this is, if you've ever seen Shooter, the movie with Mark Wahlberg, right? At the very moment the patsy, the assassin, whatever, shoots the target, all of a sudden law enforcement is right there, you know, to wrap it up in a bow, supposedly. But not only does he run inside and then kill the lawmaker, but supposedly he escapes and then shoots 2 other people. Now, we don't know the necessary timeline. He could have went to the other house and shot the Hoffmans before Hortman. You know, their names are very similar. Maybe he got them confused. In any case, it's a propaganda psyop. People won't know. People will easily get confused the names, and that will throw them off in terms of what they understand about being the actual motive of the killing, right? All right, let's get more into this story. All right, I'm going to show you a map here. So it shows you a map here of Minnesota. Hold on. It shows you a map of Minnesota here where the shootings occurred. The suspect stayed in a rented room, supposedly here with his best friend, right here with his best friend. I think this is what they're talking about. Right near the shootings, supposedly a safe house for the shootings in Brooklyn Park. We don't know where he worked what his day-to-day was, why he rented a room with his supposedly best friend in Brooklyn Park, an hour away from where his family lived in Green Isle. Because we don't know if any of his jobs, what exactly he did every day. Now, he was on this board, this labor board. He was reappointed, I should say, by Tim Walz, the governor. Governor said he didn't know him. But he's only an hour away. So depending how long he needed to be, how much he needed to be in Brooklyn Park or Minneapolis, right? So he's an hour away from Minneapolis. So maybe he had to work in Minneapolis. What he did every day, why an hour commute was, or 50 minutes was too long? Why wouldn't you want to be with your family? No, so he rents a room in the outskirts of Minneapolis, in between Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. I'll go back to the map here, and then it shows the suspect's car was found by police. The suspect's listed address in Green Isle, where his wife and stuff were from, where his wife lives. And the suspect was detained. I think it was less than a mile from his home. Now, what fucking stupid criminal would, after you commit a murder, what stupid criminal would go home? Right? What did I say in the beginning? Is that what you really would like to do is get out of the state, because in the state where the crime is committed, where the most law enforcement investigations will be happening. So if he got out of Minnesota and went to wherever, Michigan or God knows where, is that there'd be less law enforcement dedicated to your apprehension. Not this fucking guy. And this is where it gets funny. So the guy crawls out on his belly. The sheriff of Ramsey County, Bob Fletcher, posted a photo on Facebook of the suspect being taken into custody in a field. He was laying in a field, crawling on his belly. The photo appears to be altered, though, with the officers' faces obscured. Now, I know, right? We don't need to state the obvious, is that the people that released the photo didn't want to identify cops. I get you. I get that. But when you alter a photo and then give it to a news agency and it's clearly been altered, you don't know if that's the only alteration there is. Maybe this guy's head was put on a different body of a different person. We don't know. I mean, I could know. I'm an expert. I hate to say this, I'm an expert in photo manipulation. So I'll look at the photo. I'm not going to do that. Currently, we've got more to talk about. So we'll see. We'll see what this means. More from New York Times. Brooklyn Park offices with proactively... Brooklyn Park officers were credited with proactively going to Representative Hortman's home where they found Bolter. If that had not happened, I have every confidence that this would have continued throughout the day. You got to be kidding me. So if Brooklyn Park officers miraculously show up at the scene of a murder while it's happening, boy, they're good. That the assassinations would have continued throughout the day. Now, so was Hortman the first shot or was Hoffman the first shot? We don't know, right? We don't know. So they say, but the cops didn't apprehend him. So are they trying to say that the assassinations would have continued if the cops didn't show up and have a shootout with this guy who ended up escaping anybody, purportedly to shoot other people? Even though the son and I think it was the daughter of the Hoffmans called 911. And so it wouldn't have continued throughout the day. And how did they know that this guy was Bolter? They don't know anything. They just happened upon an assassination as it's happening. Come on. The authorities were confident that the suspect committed the violence alone. Oh, that's who does this sound like? It sounds like Matthew Crooks. No, nothing to see here. No, he had his phone with him and was communicating on an encrypted app with people abroad while he's committing the act of violence. But he acted alone. So the authorities were confident that the suspect committed the violence alone. We don't know. You don't know that. You don't know that. The guy in the mask, the shooter, and Bolter could be two separate individuals. We don't know. We don't know that the shooter of the Hoffmans and the shooter of the Holtman is the same. We need to see the evidence. And it's at least the guy's alive, so I guess there's going to be a trial where we can see all the evidence. And I'm not saying that he's not the shooter, but what I am saying is that this guy, if this guy is the shooter, or even if he isn't, he's more than likely connected to intelligence. Even though he appears not to be that intelligent. He had a manifesto and a target list, but no plans to escape. He was just going to go home, and watch TV and have a TV dinner. He got into a shootout with police that confronted him on the scene, but he didn't have a shootout with police when he was crawling through a field on his belly. Right? Because everybody yesterday was, including myself, Alex Jones, was saying that this guy's going to end up dead like every other one. And then there's, it's all wrapped up in a tight little neat bow. No, he's going to be Ryan Routh type, because that was the thing that everybody was complaining about. I said Matthew Crooks. Thomas Crooks, is that he ended up dead. Dead men tell no tales. Wrap it up. It's all done. So with the second assassination attempt at Donald Trump, this guy has to be captured. And he also was intelligence. He was in Ukraine and recruiting people for the Ukraine war and seemed to go fly around unmolested, even though that he's not working, and he had 9 cell phones. And I mean, come on. Back to the article. An alert police officer thought he saw Vance Bolter running into the woods. That led police to converge on a rural area near Green Mile, Minnesota, and eventually take him into custody. Actually, there was a trail cam. Someone, no sources named, someone monitoring a trail cam saw Bolter. Was it an alert police officer that was monitoring trail cams? He said they said it was an alert officer. Drew Evans, the superintendent of Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, said SWAT teams and aerial units converged on Green Isle after someone reported seeing the suspect on a trail cam. The suspect was captured near the home where he lived with his wife and children outside of Green Mile, Minnesota. That's roughly an hour's drive southwest of Minneapolis and the suburbs where the shooting took place. That's what I said, is about 50 minutes. But that's too long a commute for him, so that he has to stay with his best friend, a fat drama school dropout that knows everything about him, and even though he did, and we're going to get to that, he didn't talk about politics, or didn't talk publicly about politics, but I knew he was a Trump supporter and he voted for Trump. Of course, because that's the narrative it has to be. God forbid if it was another Democrat committing violence. Democrat, socialist, anarchist, whatever. You're going to have poli-sci people saying, well, anarchism really isn't leftism, but Anyway, man suspected of shooting 2 Minnesota lawmakers arrested. There's nothing new. Senator John Hoffman and his wife were also shot. Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed. Tim Wall says, well, he said it was a political assassination. But let's get to the Daily Beast, shall we? Democrat assassin is strong Trump supporter, best friend reveals. Now, if you didn't see the video, you might want to look at it. The suspect of the assassin. The suspected assassin, at least they say suspected assassin. It's not what the cops say. Who ambushed a Minnesota state senator and lawmaker in a deadly attack was a strong supporter of President Donald Trump, his roommate revealed. How does his roommate know this? Who knows? David Carlson told reporters Saturday that suspected killer Vance Bolter voted, and there's a typo here, for the MAGA president last year. The revelation came as Republicans such as Elon Musk painted Bolter, who was appointed to Governor Walz's Workforce Development Board in 2019, as a violent leftist, despite his pro-life views and his plans to target dozens of Democratic leaders. Okay, so we don't know anything about this guy. Where the Daily Beast, like other leftist publications, aren't going to attribute where they get their information. Despite his pro-life views, okay, according to what, where did you read that he's pro-life? Or did you hear it just from this one source, his best friend and roommate, who is very dissimilar from this guy? This guy Bolter looks like a clean-cut poser. And his best friend roommate is a slovenly, long-haired, unshaven drama school dropout that conveniently tells everybody he's a Trump supporter. He told me, and not only did he tell me he's a Trump supporter and a pro-lifer and that he voted for Trump, he also sent me a text message and said, I did it. You're going to hear a lot of things about me. It's a really hard time. You might not even see me anymore. I might be dead soon. Have you ever heard those kind of texts or social media messages before? It's almost scripted from the intelligence world. Carlson told CNN that he received a text message from Bolter around 6 a.m. on Saturday. Is it before? Okay, so it's after the shooting, conveniently before No Kings kicks off. Whoops. Hours after he allegedly gunned down Democratic State Representative Melissa Hartman and her husband at a home in Brooklyn Park, and critically wounded State Senator John Hoffman and his wife in their home in Champlin. All right, let's look big picture. All right, so this guy is on the lam after murdering 2 people, gunning down 2 others, getting in a shootout with police. He's on the lam, running through the woods, but he thought it would be a good time to pause and send text messages. Now, do you know anything about cellular phone triangulation? So if you're trying to elude police, wouldn't you turn off your phone? When you turned on your phone, wouldn't it give your location away? Don't know. The story goes on to say that the text said, I just wanted to let you know while I'm running from the police and on the lam that I love you guys both. Who is he texting to? All right. So, did any of the brilliant journalists ask this fucking guy who the Love You Guys Both is. Is this guy Evans married? He doesn't look like he'd be married. And he lives in a little teeny cape, little teeny house that supposedly Bolter was staying at. And then it says a Bolter allegedly said in a text, according to Carlson, excuse me. And then Bolter added, they don't say Bolter allegedly added, I don't want to say anything more and implicate you in any way. How would you implicate them in any way? I am sorry for all the trouble this has caused. It sounds like a bad suicide note concocted by intelligence agencies. You see the same phraseology over and over and over again. And who would do this? If you're running from the law, why shouldn't you, if you're on foot, shouldn't you be trying to get out of state? You know, carjack somebody, take their car, or steal a car, or whatever, and try to drive out of state? No. You're going to crawl on your belly through the grass back to your house. Now, and if you were going to go on an assassination spree, wouldn't you have cars, you know, rent a few cars and have them staged in certain places? All right. More news. New York Post. What are Vance Luther Bolter's politics? Alleged Minnesota assassin was appointed by Tim Walz, voted for Trump. In quotes, because the only person we have saying that he was a Trump supporter or Republican or anything like that is this drama school dropout, Carlson, which was his supposed roommate. Now, do we have even any evidence that he stayed there? But this guy makes himself available to the press and then gives out important evidence, leaks it to the press, not to the police. How come that place wasn't closed down and being mobbed by investigators, taking fingerprints and doing all this shit? If he was staying there. Maybe, wouldn't they be worried it would be rigged with explosives? And it's just ridiculous. Haunting security camera footage believed to show Bolter wearing a creepy latex mask of an old man's face was shared on Saturday by the FBI, which issued $50,000 reward for information leading to his capture. Do they really think this guy is going to be running around in a plastic mask? Now, why would the FBI release this? Now, nothing against Kash Patel, but I'm still think there's an aspect of the FBI that is still involved in black bags, black ops, etc. Why would they release this to the public if it doesn't show any fucking evidence? They think a guy running around in a plastic, rubber mask would be running around dressed as a police officer after killing a couple people? You really look out your window and see a guy in a rubber mask and go, oh, I'm going to open the door. His roommate said he had conservative political views. So one source, that's all we got, but rarely talked about politics and didn't seem overtly political. So he rarely talked about politics. Then how would you know the guy voted for Trump? He was a Trump supporter. He voted for Trump. He liked Trump. Well, for someone who rarely talked about politics, how did you know this convincingly? He didn't like abortion. Well, that's sort of political too, but he rarely talked about politics, but it seemed like he talked about politics a lot. And it's all one source. Do you have any other sources that say he was conservative? You don't. All right, more from the New York Post. When cops searched Bolter's car, they found a list of targeted individuals. Of course they did, including several politicians as well as abortion providers and pro-abortion politicians, the Star Tribune reported. Before I go on, if some of you were around during 9/11, remember that they found the terrorist car, the terrorist cars that had, makeshift diagrams of the attack they were planning and a Quran just sitting in the back seat. And if you know anything about Muslims, they don't leave their Qurans in cars. And also purportedly these same terrorists were snorting cocaine and going to strip clubs, but I digress. So according to people even though they didn't release the list, the authorities confirmed that Democratic Representative Kelly Morrison and U.S. Senator Tina Smith were also on the list. A picture of handwritten flyers with the slogan "No Kings" has become a popular anti-Trump rallying cry, were also reportedly found in his car, according to law enforcement. Now, why is this? Is he trying to paint himself as a Democrat? Is that it? And the thing with intelligence ops, they're almost so complicated that you can't make anything out of what's happening. Like the guy that blew himself up in the Tesla at Trump Tower. It took weeks to sort out what all the conflicting meanings were. So he's a Republican, but he has no King's flyers. But he didn't think that he's going to text his best friend and the cops are going to get, or the media is going to get to his best friend and tell everybody that he's a Trump supporter. I mean, seems ridiculous. All right, here's the important part. Wife of Minnesota shooting suspect detained with cash, weapons, passports as manhunt continues. And this was from the 15th. Jennifer Butler was taken. They should, just as a side note, I gotta close up here pretty soon, but so I'm gonna whip through these things, but because this is taken up all the time. So wife of Minnesota shooting suspect detained with cash, weapons, passport as manhunt continues. Did Butler have cash and weapons and passports and a getaway plan? No, obviously not. Jennifer Butler was taken in for questioning after officers stopped her vehicle when she was traveling with 3 other relatives who aren't named. So she was fleeing and prepared to flee. Why? Is she going to be implicated? We don't know. All right, we're going to have to race now so I can try to keep this at an hour. It's going to be over. So Jennifer Butler was taken in for questioning after officers stopped her vehicle. I mean, they were looking for her vehicle. High priority operation involving roughly a dozen squad cars and was not random. So it wasn't a random stop. The scene remained active for up to 3 hours. No one was placed under arrest that night, but she was fleeing. So I say she's intelligence also. They did Daily Beast. Cops probe have captured MAGA assassin as part of a broader network. So now here comes the paint job that they're going to paint all of MAGA, Donald Trump, all his supporters as assassins and violent, which they were trying to do before. Remember the white supremacist extremist, MAGA extremist? They were trying to do that before, even though all the evidence shows that the left and the progressives are more extremist. Cops are not ruling out the possibility that the assassin is part of a broader network. And watch, you'll see it's going to come out. He's part of Goobly Goo. It's a network of MAGA-loving, Trump-loving assassins, some bullshit like that. You'll see. Even though there'll be no evidence, except for maybe the drama school dropout. Oh, that's right. He did mention the gobbledygook, the order of gobbledygook, which we're going to take out all the Democrats or something. If you really want to help the Republican cause, why would you be committing violence and that then could be attributed to the MAGA cause? Everybody on the right has been saying that for years. Stop. Don't do it. Don't commit violence. Don't, even on the day of January 6th, people were saying, stop, don't do it. But miraculously, as people keep popping out of the woodwork, PJ Media, Oregon man takes U.S. Senate Hall of Shame lead after contemptuous take on Minnesota shooter. So it's Ron Wyden, and he says, well, as Minnesota lawmaker Aaron Murphy said, who just this week, after free health care for illegal aliens was voted down, accused Republicans of putting the gun to the head of the woman who mere days later was fatally targeted in a shooting that carried out by appointee Minnesota Governor Tampon Tim. They just voted mere days after a Democrat voted not to supply illegal aliens with free health care, was voted down. The swing vote, which was the House Speaker, is killed. But Ron Wyden said this is targeted political assassination. Every single Republican needs to condemn this violence before people end up dead. I condemn the violence, but this shit stinks as high heaven. If you know anything about how intelligence works, it's always layer upon layer of unintelligible, incomprehensible meanings and evidence. Very strange. All right, more news really quick. We got a couple minutes. LA Mayor Bass says if ICE raids persist, there'll be nobody left to nanny the kids or mow the lawns. Okay. Yeah, Americans don't want to do that. And who cares? If there are Americans that want to do that, if they don't have illegal aliens here, those Americans, those few Americans who still want to cut lawns or nanny the kids will get paid more. Post-millennial foreign national arrested for concealing role as perpetrator in Rwandan genocide, fraudulently entering the U.S. Vincent Negamarafura, 65, was arrested Wednesday after allegedly concealing his role in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. And if you know anything about that, was another psyop to see if they could, via talk radio, via media, get a tribe in Rwanda to kill the other tribe and to commit genocide. It was all done via media. They used a psyop to whip people into a frenzy and get them to commit violence. Cut the tall trees. The federal list, as deportations rise, the U.S. is on track for the lowest murder rate on record. Even before deportations, the murder rate was falling. Less people are prone to violence. It has nothing to do with the availability of guns or anything like that. Just less people, the more people become enlightened, the more, they need to kill. Plus, there's all sorts, there's some, I don't want to get people pissed off, but there's some credibility to the notion that because abortion is legal, less unwanted children are born, which means to less unwanted young men who mostly commit murder, who grow up with a chip, and then they end up committing the murder. So it's very complicated, but the murder rate has been falling, but this helps. When you get law enforcement to catch criminals, you get less crime. Well, and if you keep them in jail, the violent ones, there's less recidivism. Post-millennial convicted al-Qaeda sympathizer taught children at New York City Community Center. Tarek Mahana, 43, had been instructing children as young as 4 in Arabic and the Quran in Muslim Community Center on Staten Island in West Brighton since January. And this guy just isn't a teacher of the Quran. He was also previously detained trying to enter Afghanistan from Pakistan with other militants. Just the news, Egypt arrests and deports about 200 anti-Israel activists headed towards Gaza. Egypt arrested and deported about 200 anti-Israel activists from 80 countries who were heading to Gaza. They were mostly Algerians and Moroccans. However, there were some from the United States, Australia, the Netherlands, Spain, and France. If you didn't know, the Gaza Strip used to be part of Egypt. And then Israel took it over. And then they gave it to the Palestinians, and then the Palestinians in Gaza voted for Hamas as political representation. And Hamas is a militant organization, and so although Fatah in the West Bank had disavowed violence, they wanted, the Palestinians who wanted to keep the militancy going went to Gaza. And whether Israel had a hand in keeping the militancy alive or whatever is a different. Just the news, 4 arrested for assaulting ICE agents at Nebraska Food Company. So the violence continues. It's all on the left, leftists, and people protecting people that are here illegally. So you can't touch law enforcement. Can't touch them. It's actually illegal to touch law enforcement. touching somebody unwantedly is assault, and that can be prosecuted if you're a civilian, but it is absolutely a no-no to touch law enforcement. And there you go, media. You touch the officer, LAPD officer goes ballistic on ABC reporter at protest. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but ABC News correspondent Matt Gutman said he didn't touch a police officer, but one police officer said, "You touched my partner. You can't touch police," which is true. So whatever. You're working in a police environment. Whatever the cops say goes. Or they can arrest you. They don't need cause. If you're working in that sort of environment and they feel you're obstructing their activities, they can arrest you. New York Post. Trump to flood big cities like LA and New York City with ICE agents in single largest mass deportation program in history. He's not backing down. He's doubling down in these blue cities. Reuters, Trump administration weighs adding 36 countries to travel ban, memo says. Angola, Antigua, Barbados, Benin, Bhutan, Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Cambodia, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Djibouti, Dominica, Ethiopia, Egypt, Gabon, Gambia, Ghana, Kyrgyzstan, Liberia, Malawi, Mauritania, Nigeria, St. Kitts, Nevis, a lot of Caribbean countries, St. Lucia, Sao Tome, Principal, Senegal, South Sudan, Syria, Tanzania, Tonga, Tuvalu, Uganda, Vanuatu, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. In any case, a lot of these countries weren't accepting the expatriation of their citizens to their country, or deported individuals who are nationals of their country. They don't accept them back. And so another thing is providing reliable identity documents. In other words, people could go through their country using fake documents. And so they use that as a jumping point to illegally enter the United States. Iran was behind 2 assassination attempts on President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu claims in bombshell interview. President Trump shouldn't listen to Bibi. He just wants to draw America into his war with Iran. We shouldn't do it. Trump, if you're listening, not at any cost. Who cares if Iran was behind the 2 assassination attempts? I don't think they were. I think Western intelligence is behind everything, including the fall of the Shah of Iran, but we'll get into that. Just the News, Green Group has, with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, part of a network influencing U.S. policy. Yes, the left is aligned with communist China, authoritarian communist China, and I'm not going to digress into why, but all the green groups meaning to make energy more expensive and harder, all the policies meaning to hobble the United States and United States growth are all connected to the Chinese Communist Party. The Democratic Party of the United States is connected to the Communist Party. All leftist groups, academia, they're all connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Democratic states, I have, followed around Democratic politicians, mayors of cities, and other high-ranking Democratic officials as they tour the United States with communist China, and then they go over to communist China, just like Tim Walz did many, many times. Tim Walz is connected to the communist China. I mean, it goes on and on. I don't want to get into it here, but I'll just give you the details. State Armor, the watchdog group, says nonprofits coordinating with the U.S. climate groups. They influence climate policy, advance the interests of the CCP, and receive money from the CCP or CCP-connected groups that are run by Chinese nationals. I mean, everything's nested in shell companies, whatever. Former Cuomo campaign advisor led Chinese state oil company. Larry He, who served as Mr. Cuomo's Asian outreach director, held senior post at multi-billion-dollar firm owned by China, but omitted the experience from his resume. They don't tell you this shit. They never disclose it because it's espionage. And when it's like smuggling shit into the United States. Whoopsie, no, we didn't know. It's just smuggling vials of pathogens in my socks, but I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. All right. Thanks for joining me today. I went over a little bit, like 10 minutes. I'm misconnected here. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Follow me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Get Our Minds, Truth Social. Sorry I went long there. Substack. Thanks for joining me, though. Remember, you're under attack psychologically, biologically, particularly with this assassination. The timing is suspect. So anything you look at, if the timing is just so coincidental, it makes your head spin. It's because it's a contrived black op. They made it to look, and this guy might very well come out and say, yes, I'm a Trump supporter. I shot these Democrats for Trump. Whatever. I don't believe it. It happened on the morning of the No Kings. Why did he have No Kings flyers in his car? What was the point of No Kings reference? Why did it happen on that day? If he wanted to assassinate these people, he could have done it days before, weeks later, whatever. So it just seems all contrived. Please join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. I'm going to give you a heads up right now that Friday and Monday, I won't have a show because I'm going away for the weekend, or plan to. But join me on Tuesday. Also, this Tuesday, probably have a Tuesdays with Perry. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot going on with Iran that we need to discuss. Apparently today, Israel announced aerial superiority over Iran, or at least the western part of Iran. There's really this could spiral out of control very quickly, but as we found out early on, Israel, the Arab states are no match for Israel. And it complicates things that Trump, the United States supports Israel. You have the Israel lobby and all this other shit. All right, thanks for joining me today. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace out. Respect.
Plenty invested in my efforts to stress in the segments of cops stopping and asking me questions. I didn't do the crimes they suggested, but they felt it important to take me in for questioning. I get mad and give their ass a piece of a mind with no piece at that time I was released, but already screwed. Hadn't already missed my interview. Applying to Al Bundy, some women's shoes, whatever to make rent, but now I lose. What can I do? But anywho, who else feels it? Even after you get paid, broken the bill hits. And nah, it ain't that I'm complaining, but I'm feeling a bit trapped and I'm trying to explain it to you. Danger proving more than